All right, we are live. So as mentioned, I'm Dezz Asante from the TechMuze podcast. Today, we get the pleasure of having a conversation with Morgan Ryder, who is the vocalist and bassist in a metal band called Vesperia. How you doing, brother?
Pretty good, Dezz. How are you doing today?
Excellent. Now, for those listening, Morgan and I actually go way back to the early days of when you were getting into playing music. We worked together a little bit at a place called Millennium Music where I used to teach, and then we've worked together for a few years over at Long and McQuaid, the music store, which I just recently left. But I believe you're still hanging out there, aren't you?
It's still there. Actually, I'm off for a little bit now. We're officially on the road, so I'm gone.
Well, tell us a little bit about that. You got this what is it, Kalma, the tour?
Yeah, we're direct support for a band from Finland called Kalma, and it's basically hitting every corner of Canada except for Newfoundland and the Territory. So we'll be doing a lot of driving. Nice,
yeah. So how did this tour come about?
Well, it's actually the tour manager and the booking agent, Francis. He runs Apocalypse Metal. He just emailed us out of the blue. I guess there's been a lot of publicity surrounding, good PR surrounding the band over the last few months. So I guess he saw us as the best candidate to be on that particular tour. So
right, very cool. Well, congrats on that. How long's the tour?
Basically all of April. We're going to be doing 20 shows with Kalma, and then we're doing a handful of shows on the way back because the tour actually ends in Calgary. And I don't know if anybody's actually done that drive before, but it does suck to do in one go.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's a lot of land in between those places. So this is a Canadian tour? You're staying in country?
Yeah, we're just doing nothing stateside, just all of Canada. So
okay, very good.
We got a lot of Americans asking for it to come down, but unfortunately, we're not getting the visas or anything this time. So everybody's gonna have to come to Canada to see the tour.
I was just listening to an episode of the CD Baby DIY Musician podcast just about an hour ago, and they were talking about some of the logistic hurdles that happen when you want to start to move into other countries, and some of the horror stories of, people getting stuck at the border and having all their gear torn apart and this and that if you don't got the right papers and stuff.
Yeah,
and even work visas, like if you're paying gigs, you got to make sure you have all those ducks in a row as well, because you can get in trouble otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, man. So listen, let's get a little backstory on the go here for anyone who's listening or who will be listening in the future who's not familiar with Vesperia, or actually maybe you could talk a little bit about Crimson Shadows as well, because you had an involvement there. Just give us the sort of the 25-cent background tour of what you've been up to.
Well, I guess it all started a couple of years ago. Look at my more recent hard touring would start with the band Crimson Shadows. They're kind of like a power metal-y sort of band from the Toronto area also, but we took part in the Walk in Metal battle in 2013. We ended up going overseas and playing the Walk in Open Air Festival in North Germany, and I mean it's the biggest metal festival of its kind, so there's like 100,000 people there. It's pretty big, but that in turn led us to getting signed with Napalm Records out of Austria. And we ended up touring all of Central Europe with a band called Ailstorm. They're from Scotland. We hit like 17 countries or something in 2014.
Wow.
And then I wanted to get a little more busy with my own project, Vesperia. It sort of felt like the more time I was spending with Crimson, the more time was being taken away from Vesperia, and I was slowly watching Vesperia die away. So something needed to happen. So I revitalized Vesperia, and we've been hitting the road, and we've been playing a lot, and we actually have done 3 tours in the last year, all in North America, and we also actually did the whole Walk in Metal battle thing. We went back to Walk in Open Air in Germany as Vesperia.
Let's talk about that for a second, because when you were with Crimson Shadows and you played the Walk in Open Air Fest, one of the reasons why you got interest from Napalm Records is because you guys pretty much took the show, right? You won it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you went back, what was it, the following year or 2 years later?
2 years later.
2 years later with your other band, Vesperia, and won it again. Am I correct?
Yeah. the time in tuning that a Canadian band's want. And I have
yeah. So I'm gonna venture a guess and say you guys must be pretty good at what you do.
Oh, we have fun.
Well, I know from chatting with you that you guys put a lot of work into it. What's your rehearsal schedule looking like these days?
We've been rehearsing pretty diligently. It's usually 2 to 3 times a week. We aim for Tuesdays, Thursdays, Sundays, kind of thing, and we go for a few hours at a time. But right. It's pretty straight to the point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I mean, you gotta earn it, right? You gotta work for it, and there's. It's very rare that you get the sort of Justin Bieber phenomenon where you throw a video on YouTube and someone famous sees it and puts you under their wing. That's like winning the lottery. So that's not a very good strategy. You gotta put your work in, and you gotta think with a strategy and a plan. So what do you now? You were telling me earlier that you guys have you're not signed. You're still full indie, although you have signed a deal with a manager. Tell me a little bit about that and what's his or her role.
Well, yeah, actually, we signed with Eric Dow from Fatal Illness Management out of California just this month, actually. And basically, they're going to be in charge of the back end, booking shows, helping us negotiate shows, and basically act as a liaison between us and any potential record labels, as we do have a new album coming out soon.
Okay, so they're taking a bit of the load off of what you would otherwise have to be doing yourself. I suppose is the general idea. Yeah, absolutely. Focusing on the music. What sort of business arrangement? Like, is it in your opinion? At what point should an artist or a band start thinking about getting management? Like what ducks should you have lined up in a row before that becomes a worthwhile endeavor?
I think when the workload becomes too heavy for you and your bandmates to take on your own, when there's, when you're actively touring and when you have recording coming up, and when the work just becomes way too much for you and it starts taking away from you actually playing and writing, then I think that becomes the time when you need to start looking for a manager.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I imagine, getting to a point where there is some revenue coming in, whether that be from gigs or from merch sales or album sales online, offline. If there is a little bit of revenue coming in, then you have a little bit of scratch to invest in outsourcing some of these jobs to a manager, for example.
Exactly. Well, it's kind of, the more work they do, then the more work that we get, sort of thing.
And of course, the more money they'll make as well as the management.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you guys have, without, I don't want to pry too deeply, but do you guys have sort of a percentage arrangement with the manager?
Yeah, we have a percentage arrangement. I mean, some companies, management companies like to do a sort of a retainer sort of understanding, but we have a standard percentage going with our manager. And that makes everybody happy.
Yeah. It does take some of the risk away, from getting screwed, I guess, by someone if you don't know them very well or these sort of things. I've heard a lot of horror stories of people getting messed around by their quote unquote manager, taking money off the top, things like this, right? So hopefully you guys have a good relationship and you don't run into any of those kind of difficulties.
we do. I mean, I knew Eric well before the idea of him becoming our manager came up, and I've crossed paths with him a few times over the last few years, like on the 70,000 Tons of Metal cruise when his band was touring through. So he's an active touring musician himself, but this is one of his latest endeavors.
Okay, very cool. Okay, here's a question for you that I'm curious about. When you were still playing with Crimson Shadow and you won the first Wacken Open the festival, when you started to get involved with Napalm Records, tell us a little bit about that experience and how things may have changed between pre-record contract and post. Give us a little insight into that.
Having a large label like that. Immediately, all of a sudden, behind a band, it gets people interested and curious to check out that band. It was a pretty straightforward process, actually. Our manager, Crimson Shadow's manager, handled a lot of the behind the scenes and negotiating on our behalf. So we didn't see too much of that. I mean, we made a few yeses and nos to what best suited our interests, but it was pretty quick as far as the turnaround was concerned. I mean, we were in the studio at the time, so I guess it might have been a little longer than it felt. But
Right.
having a large label all of a sudden opens a lot of doors because there's already an interest and trust built in that large label from a variety of people in a variety of markets. So we all of a sudden had people from all corners of the world checking us out, and all of a sudden our album sales spiked, our online sales spiked. It was kind of interesting and exciting to watch it unfold.
Now, in your opinion, because I suppose it all depends on the specifics of the deal, of the contract that you sign. So I can certainly understand that when a label that has a lot of contacts in the industry, a lot of eyeballs already looking at their catalog of artists, there's as you mentioned, there's an instant exposure thing that happens. I guess a lot of times, depending on the label and the genre of music. Now you're in the metal genre, and what would you call your subgenre? Because it's not just metal; there's all kinds of metal out there.
We like to simplify it by calling ourselves epic metal.
Epic, I like it.
Because I mean, we talk. A lot of our lyrics sort of have like a kind of high fantasy, sort of medieval Viking kind of element going on. Our music itself is very epic and big and fast and resplendent, or has a lot of orchestral elements and a lot going on. So it's, epic metal is what we like to define it as.
Okay, that works for me. Epic metal it is. So as I was going to ask, like, depending on the specifics of your contract, there's. When a label gets behind you, obviously they're doing it for their own business purposes as well, right? So right. They see something in what you're doing, they see something in the fan base that you've managed to acquire already, and then they put a little gas on the fire and just amplify things a little bit quicker, so that you achieve a little hopefully success quicker, so that they can also start making money off of you as well, right?
Absolutely.
Now, apart from the speed. Overall, what was the sort of taste in your mouth that you were left with dealing with the record label? Did you guys have a really fair deal? Were they taking a lot of money off the top of sales of things, or that what was the general idea?
I mean, they gave us good deals on purchasing merch because they had all their own merch manufactured for us. So we got a nice wholesale value from it, and in turn didn't really have to pay back too much to them as far as the sales were concerned. I mean, it was a happy relationship, and to this day they're still signed with Napalm. I think they're still having they have a good relationship with them, but it was pretty easy as far as the transactions were concerned, and there's really no hassles involved. And Napalm Records is an extremely good label, and it's comprised of many excellent, hardworking people. And
right.
Actually, when we played out in Austria, they all came out and visited us, and
nice.
We kind of had like a little sort of ice-breaking kind of party there. But it was, they're a great label and easy to deal with.
Very cool.
I mean, it can vary from label to label too. I mean, I've had some bad experiences with other labels, and they're definitely a lot easier to work with and a lot more understanding and accommodating.
Very good. Well, I'm glad to hear that you had a good experience. I guess ultimately now in your situation, things are always more, what's the word I'm looking for? Just risky, I suppose, when there's sums of money that are being moved around. So in your case with Napalm Records, they were basically providing more of a support and an amplification role, or did they also like financially back you? Did they finance an album or what was the deal there?
They gave us an advance that was used to pay for our album, so the recording, mixing, and mastering processes. We also got tour support. They sent us a bulk of merch in advance. They did a lot for us actually, but that was actually one of the reasons we went overseas and toured Europe with Hailstorm.
Right.
Because of them, they were rooting for us, because Hailstorm is actually signed to Napalm Records, so they wanted two Napalm Records bands touring together in Europe.
Right, very good. So that's cool. So I guess the ultimate question is, in your personal opinion, should artists in general be striving for a record deal still these days, or do you feel that we have enough tools and technologies that we can really do it on our own, or maybe a little bit column A, a little bit of column B? What do you think about that? Because it's a conversation I have a lot, as you know, with the Artist Promotion Blueprint, and I'm a big proponent of the DIY music industry. I've got nothing against labels, although I do have something where one needs to be very cautious whenever you're entering into a business relationship, and that's got nothing to do with just the music industry. That's business in general. So there's always that little bit of conflict. What are your thoughts on that? Is it a goal? Like, should we be striving for labels?
I don't think any band should, or an artist should be striving, to obtain a record contract for the sake of obtaining a record contract. I think the main focus would be to educate yourself on how you can better promote yourself, your music, and reach your target audience. I think your time would be better spent doing that, educating yourself, than seeking out and wasting money on postage trying to get the attention of a record label, because there's 100,000 other people who are trying to do the exact same thing. So if you're trying to ascend in a way, and become a bigger artist and enjoy more success, then I'd say your time is better spent doing research and finding out how you can reach your target audience.
Right.
Because essentially that's what a label is doing, is they're taking your music and putting it in the ears of the people who want to hear it. And if you can cross that bridge and do it yourself, then it is a lot easier. It's a lot of work, yes, but you have control over where it goes, and you have control over your music in the end too.
Right.
I mean, there's definitely pros and cons to either route, and there's artists who enjoy success in on either route as well. But the availability of, social media and all the platforms we have available today, it is a lot easier to do it independently.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of things we can do today that just simply weren't possible not long ago, which would, of course, have made it much more of a goal to get label support, because you couldn't get global distribution. There's a bunch of things that you just simply couldn't do. Now you throw a video on YouTube, you've got global distribution. Like those tools are just commonplace now. The kids growing up now, like my daughter's 10 years old, she won't know any different. That's the way the world works. And I can't believe it ever worked any other way type of thing. Right. So yeah, I can certainly see where you're coming from. I suppose a good way to think of it is kind of like what you were talking about earlier, as far as, when to seek out a manager. It may be the same type of thing. It's like when you've gotten to a plateau, to a peak, and you just need something or someone to help you get to that next level, then it might be worth looking around and exploring the options in the world around you, always with a mindset towards these are business relationships and personal relationships that you're developing. And that's important to be aware of, so that you don't end up, signing the dotted line on something that's going to bite you in the ass a little bit later down the road. Right.
To add to that, it's better to build your business and your brand so that you have the knowledge going into when you do start getting approached by record labels, because a lot of the time it does happen, even from small labels and intermediate ones and large ones. Once you've built your brand recognition and you've already succeeded in a way as an independent artist, you're going to have people approaching you. Mm-hmm. So it's better to have the knowledge going into it rather than getting a bad deal right off the bat and being locked in.
Yeah, and this is something that a lot of artists wrestle with, and it's probably got something to do with just the mindset of being an artist. A lot of times that doesn't always also accommodate the mindset of being an entrepreneur or a business person, and a lot of artists simply aren't interested in it. They want to make their music, they want to go out and play, and then they want to hope that everything else kind of falls into place. But if you don't spend some time to stop and educate yourself and to really learn what running a business means, because ultimately, if you're trying to make a living from your music, then a business you must create, right? You've got to have products, you've got to have services being your performances, you've got to have merch, etc. And then you've got to have the skills to actually manage that business, to keep track of inventory, to keep track of how many dollars are going out versus how many dollars are coming in. If you're doing paid advertising, these kinds of things are all tools that any business will use that we can also use as artists. And sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect there with artists between those two, the sort of left brain, right brain kind of ways of thinking. which is something I'm trying to help folks with that are actually interested in learning some strategy. But yeah, that's definitely an issue. And of course, when you end up with if you are the type of artist that really has no interest in business and you're seeking out somebody to deal with the business end of things for you, a record label, a manager, etc., then even if you are going to outsource those tasks, those jobs, it's extremely important that you still educate yourself on so that you can still manage the business. You drive the ship and you outsource tasks, you delegate jobs to other people in return for whatever the business arrangement is. But you got to be educated up front. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. So here's another question I was interested in. Actually, people listening might not realize, but you were actually one of my beta testers for the Artist Promotion Blueprint. The first iteration of your website, I believe, came straight out of that course. Now you've gone through a couple of different iterations now. In fact, I posted a link in the chat there, vesperiametal.com, if people want to check it out. How's the website doing? Are you getting traffic to the site? Are you able to grab emails and collect an email list? What's happening there?
Yeah, actually, it's sort of happening a little more organically now. I mean, and every time we have a major announcement or something to post, we always post it on our website before we post on our social media. And I've noticed a lot of traffic is sort of being funneled towards that because a lot more people at this time are searching our name. And I mean, with the Kalma tour coming up, there's a lot more people trying to find out who we are and what we're doing because there's a whole new audience we're about to expand into. But it's definitely still growing, and I'm seeing the numbers climb through our Google Analytics, and it's I mean, it's nothing explosive, but it's right. Good for a band.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about because you have a merch store on the site? Does that net you any sales?
Yep, I've been watching, seeing which routes people take to get to our merch store, and a lot of it is actually funneled through our website. And I think that I have a little clicking link or whatever that takes you exactly. It's on another website, but it acts as though it's part of our website, and it has the same.
Right. But you're using Big Cartel, the service.
That's right. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I can see it here. I've got it on my other screen. Now, what are your thoughts about Big Cartel? What do they do for you?
They are essentially just a marketplace, and their basic package is free. You're limited to how many items and pictures you can post up, but I think the basic package is something like $10 a month, and you get up to 25 items on there, and you can add discount codes, and it's really straightforward. It's very user friendly, and I'd suggest it to any musician looking to have an online store, or any. It doesn't have to be a musician; could be anything really. It's a great store.
So, are they? Do you have to send them inventory, or are they creating products for you? How does that work?
No, you have to keep track of your inventory. I mean, that is definitely important, but yeah, they only charge the monthly fee, and they basically have the website as a host for your store. And
right. So they do the order processing, and then you do the order fulfillment. You send the merch to the customer.
That's right. Yes.
Okay, I get it.
That way, I like to write little handwritten messages to people who buy merch, and we like to personalize each and every one. So it makes that sort of next level of connection with our fans.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I speak about a lot as well, because I do believe that in this day and age, fans are looking for a connection. It's not like, back in the 80s where the band is up here, the fan is down here. They look up in awe and say, oh, those guys are amazing. People want more of that connection these days. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it definitely would. I mean, people are more interested in what you're doing and how you're doing it, and they want to know more about you. And with Facebook, I mean, I'm getting people from all over the world adding me all the time who've seen or heard of my band, and they just want to know you, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of cool because we can do that on a bigger scale these days. This is what I like to refer to, what's referred to as direct to fan marketing, where you leave the middleman out, and there's no longer this big divide between fan and artist, and you can actually connect one-on-one, build personal relationships. And with systems like the Artist Promotion Blueprint, where you're able to have autoresponder email sequences and things already created and queued up, you have the opportunity to scale that ability to make a connection with more and more people simultaneously without it becoming the full-time job and taken away from the music, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly. You spend a little bit of time once a week to schedule all your posts and have your strategy set out, and you just set it and leave it, basically.
Yeah, and then get back in the rehearsal room and make music. That's it. And the other thing I was going to comment on, a friend of mine who I met actually here on Blab, his name is Matt Gibson. He does a podcast himself about DIY musicianship. He's in the metal scene as well. And so one of the things that I've heard him say a few times is that in the metal genre, that he's under the impression that people don't necessarily want that same kind of personal connection. They don't want to see that Instagram picture of the meal you had on the plane on the tour to on the way to the next spot on the tour or whatever. But I've been watching you guys, and you guys are definitely a heavy band. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You're in the metal scene, right? And I watch some of the stuff that you guys post, and you do a lot of that stuff. You do a lot of those behind the scenes, funny stuff in the tour van. I mean, you even posted a tutorial on how to make mead once, because I know you're big into making your own mead and getting a little bit of a buzz on when appropriate, right? So what would you say to that? I mean, are you seeing a result? Are you finding that your audience is actually connecting with you better because of some of this type of content?
I absolutely think so, and we've gained a lot of fans from posting stuff like that. It basically creates points of entry for fans, and as you used to say, it creates luck. But
yeah,
the content changes depending on the audience, so you have to be aware of that. I mean, you have to sort of test out and feel who you want to draw in and what you want to be posting out there to sort of best represent you and what you're all about. But behind the scenes stuff, I think, is definitely important, especially if you want to create less of a boundary between you and your fans, because you're giving them a glimpse into your life and what sort of goes on and helps drive your machine and what's actually taking place behind the scenes. I mean, it definitely shatters a lot of the mystique for a lot of bands. I've heard a lot of metal bands sort of reference that word.
Right.
But I like us to be out in the open. I like to have a friendly, open demeanor when it comes to us and our music.
Yeah. I think, this is obviously something that's debatable, but in my personal opinion, I think that developing that closer, more sort of quote unquote intimate connection with your audience is only going to yield fruitful results, in my opinion. I think that it's much harder these days to maintain that sort of aloof mystique kind of artist, because it means that your promotional efforts have to rely solely on your music and your videos, like your actual content. And it's got to be amazing. It's got to really stand above everything else, because there's nothing else. You're not letting people to get to know you or into your world, because even if let's say there's a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of quality, and you're smack dab at a 5, and there's a whole bunch of other bands that are at a 5, people will still become a fan of yours once they get to know you, if they resonate with how you think and your sense of humor or whatever the case may be. And you can break that boundary. But if you try to keep the whole aloof thing going, I think it's a tougher game. Not to say it's impossible, but I think it's a tougher game.
I know a few bands who actually go under who use that whole mystique to their promotional benefit, and they list themselves as on their online listings, they list themselves as anonymous. So there's no names involved, there's nothing, and they just put out cassettes. And, yeah, and they're actually drawing in a big audience. So, I mean, there's all sorts of different types of fans and listeners when it comes to metal, but the way it's branched off, I mean, there's something for everybody. So, I mean, I'm still trying to comprehend how they're gaining their reach and building their audience while maintaining that anonymity. But
yeah, I'd be curious. I'd be curious myself. Well, listen, man, I want to be respectful of your time, let you get back to your day. I appreciate you coming on and chit-chatting with us, and I'll probably pop by the store at some point and say, hey, always need new guitar strings. So, yeah, let people know if they want to get a hold of you. What's the best place? What's the social platform you use the most? How can people reach out and say, hey, or maybe investigate more about what you do?
We're pretty active on all of the major social media. I mean, Facebook, we're posting every single day at facebook.com/Vesperia Metal. We're also pretty active on Instagram at instagram.com/Vesperia Metal, and Twitter, hashtag or Vesperia Metal.
Vesperia Metal all over the place.
Pretty much, yeah. It sort of helps.
Yeah, keep it consistent. Makes it easy, I know. All right, brother. Well, thank you once again, and we will wrap the show with that.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dezz.
sails first unfurled.